You walk into a room and within seconds you already know who's uncomfortable, who's pretending, who's about to say something they don't actually mean. And your whole life people have called it a problem. Too sensitive, too intense, too much. But what if that wasn't a flaw? What if your brain works the way it does because it was built that way? On purpose. By pain. Number 1 is going to reframe your entire life. Don't skip ahead. Number 7. You think about the why behind everything. You don't just think, you excavate. A passing comment from 3 days ago is still turning over in your mind. Someone's tone didn't match their words, and you haven't let it go. A room felt off the moment you walked in, and your body knew it before your mind did. Most people move through life asking what happened. You ask why it happened and what it reveals about the person standing in front of you. Psychologists studying post-traumatic growth call this existential depth, a compulsive need to understand, an inability to accept the surface of anything. Your mind was handed something senseless, and it responded by becoming extraordinarily skilled at pulling meaning from people, situations, and silences that most minds simply move through. You've been calling it overthinking your whole life. It's not. It's a mind that learned, young, that understanding people was survival. And if that felt uncomfortably familiar, you haven't seen anything yet. Because the next sign doesn't live in your mind at all. It lives in your body. Number 6. You feel other people's pain like it's your own, not because you're polite. Because something fires in you before conscious thought has even arrived. Someone walks into the room carrying something they haven't yet found the words for. And you already feel it, before a single word leaves their mouth, before they've even looked you in the eye. And you can't turn it off. Psychologists call this emotional contagion. Everyone experiences it to some degree, but people with trauma histories experience it at a volume most people will never reach, but nobody tells you the cost. The same sensitivity that makes you extraordinary at reading people means you absorb everything you read. You don't just notice it and move on. You take it home. You lie awake at 2 a.m. with feelings that were never even yours. Fixing became your job. Soothing became your job. Managing discomfort that wasn't even yours to carry became your job too, and nobody chose you for any of it. It just became yours. You were never given permission to put it down. So you never did. Number 5 is the one that cuts the deepest because it doesn't show up as pain. It shows up in the moments you were most convinced you were in control. Number 5. You self-sabotage right when things get good. This one is the hardest to say, and probably the hardest to hear, but it's the one you've needed someone to name for a long time. You work towards something real, and when you actually get close, you pull back. You pick a fight that didn't need to happen. You convince yourself it was going to fall apart anyway, so you make it fall apart first. You leave before you can be left, and every single time you find a reason that makes it someone else's fault, or yours. Because the real reason is one your conscious mind has never been allowed to see. Psychologists call this the window of tolerance, the invisible line your nervous system draws between what feels manageable and what feels like a threat. If calm was never your baseline, if peace was always just the quiet before something broke, your nervous system eventually learned to read safety as a warning sign, not because something was wrong with you, but because the good thing felt exactly like the part right before everything went wrong. Because for a long time it always did. You weren't self-destructing, you were self-protecting, running a program that kept you safe once and never got updated. And number 4, this is the one that will make every person who ever told you that you were imagining things wish they had never said it. Number 4, you understand things before you can explain them. You knew the friendship was ending. Not because anyone said a word. You just knew. And when you tried to explain it, you couldn't find the words. It just felt true. And then it was. Every time. Measured traumatic experiences are encoded in the body, not in the verbal brain. That's why trauma responses feel so physical, so immediate, so impossible to put into words. In the gut, in the chest, in the split-second reading of a room that happens before your conscious mind has even caught up. Your body holds awareness your rational mind hasn't arrived at yet. You feel the answer before you can argue for it. You were never reading into things. You were reading what was already there, before anyone else could see it. And number 3 is the thing about you that looks like a flaw from the outside, but it is. One of the rarest forms of intelligence that exists. Number 3, you're comfortable with what others need to be simple. Someone tells you a person is good or bad, safe or not, worth your time or they aren't. Simple as that. And you stand there knowing it is never, not once, not ever, that clean. You know that someone can love you and still hurt you. That two things that feel like opposites can both be true at the same time. That life simply does not sort itself into tidy columns no matter how much easier that would make things. You probably called that cynicism for years. Or emotional distance. Or just a kind of coldness you couldn't explain. What it actually is cognitive sophistication. The kind that comfortable, stable environments almost never produce. When the world you grew up in was genuinely layered and contradictory, and no one around you acknowledged it, your mind built itself to hold that complexity, not because it wanted to, because it had to. You don't just tolerate ambiguity, you navigate it. In a world full of people who fall apart when things aren't clear, you are exactly the kind of mind that was never supposed to exist. You were forged by something that should have broken you, and yet here you are. Now number 2, this is the one that will make you feel the most deeply understood and the most deeply frustrated at the exact same moment. Number 2, you see yourself clearly, and it still doesn't stop you. Here is the paradox at the center of everything trauma builds. It gives you an almost clinical understanding of yourself, and then makes absolutely no difference. You know your patterns. You can name them, you can trace them back to where they started. You can see exactly what you're about to do before you do it, and then you watch yourself do it anyway. That gap between knowing and actually changing is one of the most painful and disorienting things a person can live with. You feel like you should be able to think your way out of this, and you can't, because awareness is not the same as healing. The brain doesn't rewrite itself through insight alone. It updates through new experience repeated enough times in a body that slowly learns it's safe to respond differently now. And that process, the real one, requires something most people who carry this find nearly impossible to give themselves: self-compassion, the kind they would offer anyone else without a second thought. You have been carrying something extraordinarily heavy for a very long time, in silence, with almost no one who understood the weight of what it costs you just to exist the way you do. What you carry, and the fact that you carry it without falling apart, is not ordinary. It never was. And now, number 1. Everything leads here. Number 1. You read people with an accuracy that unsettles even you. Not because you practiced, not because you chose it, because at some point in your life you had no choice, and your nervous system has never stopped paying attention since. Someone walks in. Before they've said a single word, something in you has already registered it. A micro-expression that lasted less than a second. A slightly forced smile, the tension held in a jaw, a half-beat pause before an answer that came just a little too fast. And you're usually right, not always, but enough. Enough that it quietly unsettles other people. And if you're honest enough that it sometimes unsettles you, too. When children grow up in emotionally unpredictable environments, a home where the atmosphere could shift in an instant without warning, without anyone ever explaining why, the brain does something remarkable. It rewires itself. It becomes calibrated to human behavior at a neurological level most people will never reach, because most people never had to survive the environment that demanded it. There's a word for what your nervous system built. Psychologists call it hypervigilance. And here is what it means for you. Your nervous system learned that tracking people accurately, quickly, constantly was how you stayed one step ahead of what was coming. And then the danger passed. But the wiring stayed, and it came with you. Into every room, every relationship, every conversation, every job, every friendship you've ever had. You have been scanning, reading, processing people involuntarily, automatically, relentlessly every single day since then. That is not anxiety. That is not you being too much. That is not something that needs to be fixed. That is one of the most sophisticated forms of human intelligence that exists, built not in a classroom, not through practice, but carved out of an environment that never should have demanded it from you in the first place. It is time to stop apologizing for it and start acknowledging what it actually cost you to build it. Because you didn't just grow up, you adapted at an age when you should have simply been allowed to feel safe. And the fact that you're still here, still searching, still willing to sit with the full weight of where all of this came from, that is not weakness. That is what it looks like when everything that tried to break you ended up building you instead. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Which one of these 7 hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments, because if you're watching this, there's someone else in that comment section who felt exactly what you felt, and they need to know they're not alone.